I'm back today reacting to my TikTok comments. If you didn't know I'm on TikTok, you can find me here. And let's dive in, let's see what questions I'm being asked and give you some responses. Okay, let's dive into the first one, which was a comment left on a video on sickness, absence and making contact, and how often you should be making contact with employees during sickness absence. So yes, but there's checking in with someone and then there's ringing someone every day. Some managers don't know boundaries. I love this comment. Absolutely true. And this is one of the biggest challenges with people management and HR, that things are very rarely right or wrong, yes or no. There's a lot around individual situations and boundaries, and individual managers often lack that knowledge, that understanding. And some of that knowledge and understanding comes from our own just understanding of boundaries and the world and what we should or shouldn't do, how we should behave, what the impact of our behaviour is on people. And some of it's understanding the employment law bit. So I see many managers who don't know the boundaries or don't want to overstep the boundaries, so do nothing. They hold back and don't do enough, and that's a real problem. And that's a big one where I think training comes in. I think it's really important that managers get training to understand the foundations, the employment law. And I know that doesn't sound like the most exciting bit, and it's also really important that you don't go and sit on like a legal employment law course. This has to be the reality, how you deal with things on a day-to-day basis, which is why I design all my courses like that. They're not sort of intricate employment law going into all the different cases and all of that kind of stuff. That's what your HR advisors, your legal advisors are there for. But as managers, you need to understand what you can do, what you can't do, and how much you can do, because it's more than you think you can do. We also get managers who have really good boundaries, and actually when they tell me what they've done, I'm like, yeah, actually that sounds like logical. It sounds like a reasonable thing to do. And when I look at it from an employment law perspective, I'm like, oh no, okay, this is going to cause us a problem because that doesn't fit with what we need to do from an employment law perspective. So it can work both ways. I think having that understanding is really important, giving people the confidence. That's one of the things I find so often. Often people get promoted into management roles because they were good at the job they did before, which is a really different job to managing people. And managing people is about two things. It's about people, it's about human relationships, it's about understanding people, it's about how we treat people, it's about how we build teams, we motivate people, we get people to interact, communicate in a healthy way with each other. It's also understanding employment law, and getting those two together, so important. Which is why I also think that just engaging HR professionals for advice when it's gone wrong is a problem, and it's why for me training is so important, and why I developed my digital courses for those that can't get me on site doing training, a whole training day with like a management team. I developed digital versions of the courses, videos just like this that enable managers in smaller organisations, or perhaps you want to get promotion into management and you want to be able to talk about the things that you should be doing. It's a course that is designed to support people from a really practical application of employment law and getting the best out of people, that communication, motivation bit, and all of those other things of boundaries. Because as this commenter says, it is about understanding those boundaries. It's about understanding how I deal with this particular situation, which may be different to the one I dealt with last week. It may be different to the one I'm going to deal with next week. And it seems the comments on my TikToks really do demonstrate that there's a lot of managers who don't understand these boundaries, and a lot of communication breakdowns going on in people's workplaces. Okay, let me move on to the next comment. Okay, this question is slightly different to most of my other ones. It's about how to get into HR, and yeah, I'm really happy to answer this one. So, how can I career shift into HR, please? I'd love to do this. What level of CIPD should I go for? I have a degree and postgraduate teaching qualification. Okay, so how do you get into HR? And I do get asked this a lot. I get a lot of emails, a lot of comments, a lot of direct messages asking me about HR careers. I have a HR career, which is that I went to university, got a degree in HR, then got my first job in HR in the NHS. Not an uncommon place to start, actually, the NHS. It is a good training ground. A lot of issues happen in the NHS, so there's a lot of access to different experiences. So I started off in the NHS, then moved over to a charity. I knew I wanted to get into consulting, so I moved over to one of the national consultancy companies. I was fortunate enough to be found by a recruiter for one of those and moved over there, got some really great training, and then moved into setting up for myself. So that's my career. So I possibly is one of the rare ones, really, because quite often you hear people who've got into HR later in life, or as a second career, or moved from management into HR. There's a lot of ways into HR. I think mine generally is reasonably rare. In terms of what level of CIPD, so I did my master's degree once I started work. So I was actually working for the charity at the time where I did my master's degree, and then got my chartered CIPD membership, which is done through an assessment process with the CIPD. And I believe there's an experience route as well to get the chartered. I think I was able to speed mine up, if I remember rightly, because of my qualification, my master's, which is the equivalent to what's a level 7 now. But I think there's an experience route to the chartered as well. So there are a number of different routes, and I know as well that things have changed in recent years. So the CIPD website is brilliant. Getting in touch with your local CIPD branch is also really useful. Some of the branches have mentoring schemes and things which are really useful. Getting HR exposure or management exposure in the industry that you're in, doing training that would enable you to get through HR interviews as well, to demonstrate that you're interested in HR. What I would say is grab as much experience as you can. So even if you're not in HR but you're in a management position, then grabbing experience in every way that you can, and also gaining learning around employment law and how that works in practice, which is what a lot of my training is around. Because I think the employment law, and that's a lot of what I did through my degrees, it's very theoretical, whereas actually when we're dealing with people, we're dealing with the reality, it's really different. But also, like HR is a huge range. I mean, there are things I did in my degree around international HR and things like that I have never touched in what I do professionally. Doesn't particularly have a huge interest to me. So I tend to like working with smaller organisations, often where I can meet the business owner. So they're not generally dealing with shareholders and things like that. Sometimes I do training with more corporate organisations. They tend to be sort of younger organisations, so more kind of start-up sort of type organisations, or ones where they're kind of less corporate, less sort of traditional corporate feel in terms of what I do. Giving managers those skills to be able to actually build relationships with their team, or where I'm working directly with business owners to build those relationships. But then you've got huge corporate HR, which I have never done. I've never worked in the really large corporates. You've also got public sector, NHS, local authority, schools, huge range of public sector HR, and they're going to have different issues in different ones as well. And also within that, you've got very generalist HR. You've got employee relations, which tends to be a sort of disciplinary grievance absence kind of situations. You've got your pay and reward. You've got learning and development. So you could find an interest. So if this person's saying that they've got a postgraduate teaching qualification, presuming they're looking at shifting perhaps into HR from teaching. So looking at HR for education would be useful. You're going to have some skills there, actually, because, I mean, education, for example, is some really specific things that they have to deal with around safeguarding, safer recruitment, that many of the corporates and small businesses just don't deal with. So you're going to have experiences of that through your teaching. If you've done any leadership roles, you'll have some experiences there. You might be able to get yourself on some training around management, leadership and that kind of thing that could help you get into HR roles within education. Learning and development roles, so you're looking at your teaching qualifications and experience, getting into learning and development roles. If you were to say get into learning and development role like in the NHS, for example, where they've got or certainly when I was working at the NHS, I presume it's still the same. They've got big learning and development teams that sit within the HR teams. You've then got opportunities to get moved over, or like secondments, or ways to get experience in other teams. Those are the sorts of things I'll be looking at to start a HR career, just to grab that experience and sort of pull it from a whole range of places. In terms of CIPD qualification, if you've already got graduate and postgraduate, so I mean level 5 or level 7 would make a lot of sense, but equally any of the levels, yeah, a few jobs seem to be specific about level 7, some do, more so level 5, but I mean anything that you can then add the practical onto. For many employers are not even aware and don't really talk about CIPD. They're actually looking more for experience and exposure, and I think it's a great way to start, and you need that experience. Even if you've got the CIPD qualification, you're going to need that experience, so grab that from anywhere you can, and you don't have to be in HR to grab that. Don't forget to check out my digital course, HR for Non-HR Managers. You can access it now, details are on screen and in the description below. If you're still watching at this point, thank you for watching. Check out these videos, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.